Welcome to our first budget session.
Get any volume here?
Can you hear us, Councilor Peltier? Councilor Peltier, can you hear me?
I'm guessing no.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it.
It says that there's sound going to it.
Louis, can you hear us? Good call.
Can you hear me now? I can't hear you.
You can hear me?
No, you say you can't hear you. Can you hear him?
Can anybody on
Apparently
Zoom
we
hear
can
us?
him.
Is anybody up there?
I can hear you.
On Zoom can hear us. It's just Louis.
So first, turn your volume up or something, because other people on Zoom can hear us.
Okay, I hear some noise now.
You hear me now?
Hey, yeah.
All right. All right, so welcome again, everyone, to our first budget workshop. I'm going to do a quick roll call. Councilor Pelletier,
Here.
Councilor Bragdon, here. Councilor Danforth,
Here.
Councilor Cray is excused. Councilor McEwen is excused. Chair Gully here. Councilor Mazur here. All right. Well, with that, this is basically just to do a general overview of the budget, not to get into any specific lines unless there's anything that stands out that needs clarification, or unless there's a major suggestion to the budget. That way we'll have enough time to address that when we get into this. As I mentioned in an email to everyone, if any suggested addition is to be made to this, the counselor can make the recommendation and it needs a second. And then when we actually go through the budget itself, to make the final determinations, we will vote on each one of those things. So with that, I'm first going to just go to Mary Alice and the manager to give a brief overview. I just want to say thank you to both of you and all the department heads for all of your work putting this together. I sat with both of you yesterday and feel really confident with where we're at. I'm sure there'll be things to discuss. I just want to say thank you and feel free to speak to it.
Greetings. All right. Yes, this has been an exciting and eye-opening process as I worked through the municipal budget for the very first time with the help of our really well-rounded and just incredible department heads that we have here, including Mary Alice with her incredible skills and knowledge on how the finances work here in town of Milwaukee. I do want to give just a very high-level overview on some major points and some heavy hitters, if you will, right off the bat before we get into going through, the individual pages of the report, if that's what you wish to do next. So in terms of the total budget, for total expenses, FY22 compared to FY23, we're looking at an increase of $867,303. We're also looking at an increase in revenues from FY22 to FY23 of a total of $971,150. That leaves the proposed introduction of fund balance at 400,000. That's a difference of $222,085 from FY22. That does have some play there. I think there's room as we work through this to fluctuate that number, anywhere between 400,000 and 600,000, depending on the needs. In terms of the net tax raise, comparing FY22 to FY23, we're looking at an actual decrease of $325,932 when all that is squared away in this initial draft. That is a total tax raise for FY23 of $2,389,511. We do not have a final update from the school yet on their budget, but we are expecting that in the very near future, so that will come throughout this process. And in terms of within the wastewater budget, we are looking at a decrease in expense and revenue for a total difference of $92,314. That's a total expense of 2.1 million, total revenue roughly 2.1 million, leaving 57,677 there as a net income. More heavy hitters on the expense side that you'll notice as we work through this process. There are impacts from the 3% wage increase, as well as some various wage adjustments throughout a couple of the departments. We have added the community initiatives director position. That total package is about $83,000. There was an increase around the combination of janitorial duties with the code enforcement officer role. So you'll remember we combined those two items recently to create a full-time opportunity that Evan Campbell has taken on the task. The increase on that was the benefits package. So the salary remained the same between the two positions. The increase in benefits, I think, was about $26,000 a total package for that opportunity. The police contract had an increase of $150,000. We have an increased paving budget of about $100,000, addressing some very big needs throughout our community with roads and sidewalks that are much needed repair. There is an increased suggested to the library contract of $25,000, and that is a long-term plan that had been presented in the past. Looking to get that to the range before the funding had dropped. I think it was back around 2015. So that'll be expected to increase over the next couple of years as well. There's an increase to the capital budget, $185,000, spread over various projects. There is some grant funding in there, increased to $150,000. And then there's information probably coming down the road regarding FAA grants that are yet to be completed. In terms of revenue, we are budgeting 100% of the suggested main revenue sharing, which is up around $750,000 this year to a total suggested main revenue sharing budget of $1,599,030. That's a substantial jump from prior year. The targeted fund balance transfer, which I mentioned above, is $400,000. Again, that's a variable as we work through this there may be room to change that. With the auto excise tax, looking at FY23, it's a proposed $825,000. That's an increase of $75,000 over FY22, which was down at $750,000. And then another big hit into the revenue would be the first installment of the loan with our Catan, which is scheduled for, is it September? And they're both 69. The total between the two payments is $69,139, and that's expected to, those payments are expected to start over this next fiscal year. So those are the, high level items there. Mary Alice, was there anything you wanted to add before we take anything further?
Well, thank you, Mr. Manager. Is there any immediate question or comment from the council on that? Councilor Madore?
I know it may be a little early in the process, but can you or Mary Alice tell me what we have in the unassigned fund balance as of right now?
It's over $4 million, keeping in mind that we're reserving $1.5 million for the school. And our revenue sharing is running favorable this year. So that should come back in on.
Because that 4 million plus is not, that's the $1.5 million that we're
It
doing
doesn't
for the
include
school.
that.
That does not include that,
I haven't taken that out now.
but that will eventually be taken out of that 4 million. So basically, we're looking at about 2.5.
We're looking at a little under 3, right?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Madore. Any other initial thoughts from the council or questions? Councilor Craig?
My assumption in reference to the automobile registration excise, that's based upon the inflated prices of vehicles, or?
Well, that's just looking at the history. That's looking at last year. We've been around 800,000, so it's aggressive. There are two items on the revenues that are aggressive. It's, increasing the excise tax, the registration, and the revenue sharing. I budgeted 100% of what's forecasted right now, 1.6 million.
I follow up on that because the concerns in reference to the state in the current budget that's pending, or I guess has been passed by the legislature, is a concern about the drop off of revenues going forward. Both the governor and the legislature as a whole concerned that we may still be facing somewhat of a setback on the revenues. Is there any, the calculation here is based upon the last year's growth carried forward?
Well, this is based on the March 17th projection. So this is right from the state.
But they did in that March 17th forecast that they were very concerned about future revenues.
Okay, they're forecasting the first forecast was $1 million.
Right.
And then the second projection is they added another 568,000.
That's for the current budget that they're passing, but I'm saying on the budget committee, the forecasting budget committee, in their report to the legislature, the governor said that they were very concerned about future projections and they cautioned in reference to counting it to continue at the current rate.
Okay, yes, I'm just pointing out that we put the 100% in there. Obviously, this is going to be a point of discussion
Thank
as
you.
far as how much risk
Thank you.
we want to take.
Thank you, Councilor Craig. Any other initial thoughts from the council? All right, seeing none, we'll just go through these overall pages here, see if there's anything that stands out. We'll start with wastewater, and we'll start with the expenses. Are there any initial questions, thoughts, or anything that stands out to the council on wastewater? expenses? Councilman Dorr?
Normally in a situation like this, if the department head is available, which Jim is, we usually have them go down through so we know what increases and decreases, so the questions can be asked at the time. So if Jim is agreeable.
Yeah, whatever you want to do.
You're welcome to. This really is just a high level thing. If there's anything you want to speak to where we're at, you're definitely invited. But really, we're just, the reason for doing it at a high level right now is so that if there's any suggested revision or any concern about a part of this, Mary Allison, the manager, can have some time to make those adjustments and come back to us with further information. Mr. Manager?
I just wanted to somewhat reiterate on that, we, looking at the schedule for these workshops moving forward, we had planned on breaking them out into department and having department heads present to go line by line, or, whatever the necessary procedure is for that. Given the simplicity of the wastewater budget, I'm certainly open to having Jim speak to it this evening if he's standing at the ready, if that's something of interest of the group. But we do plan on doing more individual department breakdowns as we move forward.
You're more than welcome to just speak to where we're at with wastewater.
Okay, sure. Well, let's start at the 2100 line then. Okay, you can see over on 2100 1101, we've got an increase for billing costs. That is the new wastewater billing system. In addition to that, for that purpose, mailing costs and whatnot. You see a decrease in sewer liens. Mary Alice sees fit, according to reduce that by $4,000. Administrative costs is up $1,600. Going down through, you see 0 increases all the way down to the audit, an increase of $2,900 to cover the audit. Any questions on that?
All set. And you're welcome to just give an overview of the whole thing rather than line by line or
Whatever you would like. Okay.
just where we're at generally, I think with wastewater, just so we have an idea. Yeah, thank you.
Any of the 2200 is increases just to cover the cost of increase for our insurance packages. We have the 2400 line. You can see the increases obviously of the wages. We did an increase on electricity. We increased that by 10%. We're not sure where we're going with the electricity. If you look at the you'll see it in the manager's report anyway. There is an increase. You're going to see that reflected in my report. Okay, we have the next place. You're going to see an increase in the chemicals for laboratory. That covers quite a lot. That's a necessary increase. Our increases for our wages. There's just a few other ones. The benefit package you'll see was added into this line this year. Makes it a lot easier to follow. And overall, it's a reduction of $13.53. Our pump station budget. Again, you see our 10% for our electricity. And to better cover well cleaning, there's a pretty good increase there. And our RV dumping station, same thing, to cover the cost of pumping that. If you look through, especially on the revenue side, you'll see that project's going very well. And that's the pump station line. You're going to see on our collection systems line, 2600. There's a pretty significant reduction there because that position has been, actually, that is a public works position. It's not something we're using currently. So we took it right out of our budget. And the 2700 line debt services, those are all where we're at with paying our bond payments. You see the increases there because we actually have the bond going into effect for paying off our $3 million projects up in the new development. Any questions there? Okay, and then you see our capital budget pretty much also, you'll see increases and decreases. You see the pretty significant one there. It's going to be the half for the main pump station upgrade project. You'll see that, and then you'll see if you're looking at the capital budget, you'll see that that's going to be in there for the next couple of years. You see a request for a pickup truck replacement. Right now, our newest truck is a 2009, and it's in pretty great shape. We're gonna keep it up, maintenance on it, but it's time to get a pickup that we can travel out for our training. As you guys all know, we're required to get training every 2 years as operators. And also to get around, you guys probably see me out there with mine a lot. This will reduce that for the next operator. Excuse me, superintendent. And I guess I can offer up, is there any questions or any comments on that?
That's great.
Thank you, John. A lot of concerns have come out recently in reference to use of chemicals. Does that come across the forever chemicals and stuff? Has that been risen in reference to wastewater and so forth?
Yeah, we actually, you mean as far as what we're using to add to the waste stream?
Yeah.
The only thing that we're going to be using to add to the waste stream would be sodium hypochlorite chlorination when required. We try to, through the whole season, not use that, but we have to be equipped to use it if our numbers are high enough. We test twice a week for E. coli bacteria from May 15th to September 30th. In this permit that we have right now, we're still waiting on a permit actually, but in our permit cycle that we're in right now, that's the months to chlorinate. It'll change from April, in the next permit cycle, we're going to be going from April to the end of October. So then,
the reason I raised it is my concern was whether it would have any type of financial implications as to what's going on and trying to eliminate a lot of these chemicals through DEP and obviously all those standards that you have to meet. There hasn't been a general discussion in reference to that.
nothing so far.
Thank you.
Sorry for going on about it.
Thank you, Council Brad. Any other questions or thoughts? All right, seeing none, and revenue, anything significant there you feel worth mentioning? Revenue side for wastewater?
Mary Alice?
The major source of his revenue is his capital, and we still have the bond proceeds for the project that were done up, the State Street project. Even though we're paying on that loan, we have not actually spent all that money. So that budget shows a revenue, revenue funding for that budget from receiving the rest of the loan to pay off to pay for the work that's being done at the end of the project and the other project that he will be starting, the pump station upgrade.
The pump station project.
There's $1 million grant that we're going to be receiving. So some of that, this budget anticipates that paying for the work that begins there. So it's cash neutral to his capital budget. It's going to be paid for through the grant and the bond that we're paying on right now.
Thank you, Mary Alice. Any questions or thoughts on that from the council? Councilman Madore?
Jim, you mentioned the sewer projects. Are the ones that were completed, the ones in the development and the ones out on Bay Street, are those done now?
Nope, nope, what has to be done there is the final, touch up around the lawns and the roadsides and whatnot, but then also the paving, whatever paving is gonna be done on those
So you
sections.
still have to do the overlay on?
That's right.
That's kind of what I thought, but I want to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Madore. Any other question or thought from the council? Thank you, Jeff.
I would just add that those paving projects are, I believe, lined up for this summer. Make sure those streets are overlaid, rather than that project.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. If we go over to town expenses, I'm just gonna go page by page. Please let me know if anything stands out significantly that you would either like more information on when we go through these, especially with the department heads, or any suggestions that you might have. So just starting on page 1, general government, any initial thoughts or suggestions? All right, seeing none. Moving on to page 2. Department 103, elections and registrations. And Department 104, town clerk's department. Any other major thoughts or questions? Moving on to page 3, Department 107, assessing. Any major questions or recommendations? Councilman Madore?
Yeah, in this budget, for assessing for expenses, are we figuring on any further advancement of in-house assessment of the community as a whole? I know we're gonna try to do some in-house assessing to do a adjustment. And is their expense included in this, or is that just gonna be part of the general?
It is not. We're back to the drawing board on that project. You're actually losing our assessor next week. So we'll be in the market for a new assessor or contracted service for assessing in the near future. That will come up and we will have that discussion very soon. But we are going to be back to the drawing board on that, you know.
That's too bad.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, it truly isn't too bad. He's our assessor. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Madore.
Chairman,
Councilman Craig?
yeah, following up on that, we've been talking about reassessing for a couple of years and trying to do it over a 2-year period. I think we should put, at least for consideration, a line in there for half the estimated cost that we were given, understanding that there'll probably be inflationary increases to that based upon what's happening. We may not include it, we may, but I think it should be presented in the beginning of the budget.
Yeah, I would second that as well. We can have some numbers on what that might look like for the next budget meeting.
I was gonna say, what was the estimated amount?
So if we were to do that in-house, given Lorna's experience and skill set, we could have done it for roughly $70,000. Contracting that service out, we're looking at north of $250,000, and it's upwards of a 3-year wait for that service.
3-year wait before it begins.
Yeah, that's the backlog for the companies that provide that service.
Thank you, Councilman Madore.
Yeah, if we're approaching this as a budget item, even trying to put half or $125,000 away, if we're gonna have to do it as contracted service, I'm not really comfortable with that figure right now in moving forward, but that's something that can be brought for the whole council. But I'm not, until I get firmer numbers all around, I'm not really comfortable in putting that in, because the last time we had money, we had $250,000 put away for an assessment, an actual assessment done, and that money is gone now. So I'm not, until such time as the actual project is considered, we've talked to getting estimates as far as actually getting the work done, so we can figure that into a budget. I'm not comfortable with making a proposed line and then not seeing it through, or making partial payments on it. I just don't think it's, it was bad government the last time. I don't think it's gonna be good government this time.
Councilor Craig. Thank you, Councilor.
I'm not in total disagreement. Look, we've talked about this for, I've been on the council for 7 years. We talked about before that. 2011, I was the acting manager. The council was talking about it back then. And the current assessment, other than the adjustment that we made last year, is decades old. I don't care what it's going to cost in the final analysis at this point. I'm saying we should have a line. I don't care if it's going to take us 3 to 5 years to even get there. Having it, we ought to be putting money aside specifically for that purpose each year. It would hit the taxpayer a lot less if we were putting 1/3 of it, 20% of it, 10% of it, or whatever it is. So that when we get to the final stage, we're not hitting them with such a severe increase in utilization of those funds to do a reevaluation. And I'm not looking for a specific, I wasn't suggesting a specific dollar amount until we get the actual figures and the council to talk about how they want to pay for that in the future. You know, how future councils are going to address it, whether they use that money like previous councils had used from when it was set aside before. Those are all, I think at the time, legitimate motions that the council took to address other issues that raised up. But if we don't get serious about reevaluation, we're going to probably be looking at 40 to 50 years since we last really did an accurate reevaluation. And I just don't think it's a proper way to govern.
Thank you, Councilor Craig. Councilor Pelletier.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with Council Parade. This is a long overdue issue, and if we don't start funding it in a restricted fund, we're never going to get started. We're never going to get off the dime to get it done. And with the demands being placed on our unrestricted account with grants that are going on, we've got to start doing something. It's ridiculous. It's a really disincentive for economic development for a company to come in here and face our mill rate with new construction when the rest of the town is paying on what, 22, 24-year-old assessments. It's ridiculous. Something's got to be done.
Thank you, Councilor Pelletier, and perhaps by the time we go to assessing next, we can address this more. Mr. Manager?
Yes, I also wanted to add that this is also something that I feel we can put on the radar of Amber, our Community Initiatives Director. I think in some of the upcoming infrastructure dollars, revaluation of a community may be able to fit into a narrative for grant funding on the upcoming programs. And it's possible we could fit it into ARPA funding as well. But we may have some grant funding opportunities in the next year to 2 years that could cover that cost in total.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Yeah, if you want to have more information on that, and perhaps some options for us to look at when we get to the assessing department next. Any other thoughts from the council on this? Seeing none. Page 4, municipal building audit legal expenses. Any significant thoughts or suggestions? Louis, is your hand still up? You just put it down, all right.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Dorr.
Yeah, are we going to, have scheduling for the audit review? I know we've done the audit. I've read it through. I would really like to have a representative from the company that actually has done the audit to come and have an overview of their work and their findings.
We are scheduled, that's on our agenda for the 20th. Joint audit review during a council meeting, both school and town.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Dorr. Council Craig.
I'm sorry, Peter, I didn't get, did you give a date?
Yes, next Thursday, the 28th, at our regular council meeting. It'll be
Based
school
upon the
and
earlier,
council.
I'm sorry, based upon the earlier emails that you sent, yeah,
Great.
I didn't know if you changed the date.
No, I haven't.
Thank you, Council Craig. Any other council thoughts or comment on page 4?
Mr. Chairman,
Council Craig.
we're talking about the building.
All three things on page 4, yes.
Okay, I came straight here, I didn't go home and grab my papers, but I did read through it and have a good understanding of where we're at. In reference to fixing, we're not finished on the front of the building or the rear entrance to the building, correct? Do we have a timeline? Is there money in here to finish that work?
I don't have an answer for that right now.
Well, that's where.
Yep.
Our next meeting, let us know what's going to be done. Thank you.
That would be a capital, I think on the cost of the capital budget item, and you don't have any.
Thank you.
I can tell you that there will be some manual volunteer labor in the landscaping in the front of the building over this next summer, removing some overgrown trees and shrubbery and things. So some of the beautification of the building will be taking place there. But yes, there are some structural things that need to be done in steps and entryways.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Councilman Dorr.
Yeah, I'm noticing a line under legal expenses, 4003, legal services. I realize that in looking at the budget, that this last year, we didn't spend a lot on legal services. But I'm wondering, should we drop that down to, you dropped it, what it looks like by 25,000. Every time we drop, I mean, it's nice to do, but every time we drop legal services, that's when something has come up that we required legal services. That's one line I would like to seriously, I mean, we still have a couple things dangling out there with suits that may or may not come to fruition that we need. I'm not comfortable with dropping that budget line down from 100,000 down to 75. I think it should stay at 100,000. If we don't use it, that's fine. If everything goes to I call it still called undesignated fund balance at the end of the year. So just for safety's sake, during the course of the year, I'd like to see that line stay at 100,000.
Looking at the, I mean, we don't have all our bills in, but possibly we could have a carry forward. That could
Offset.
Yeah.
I just see those carry forward sometimes when everything goes into, is that, on that line, that carry forward is going to stay in that line, or is it going to go to the general fund and then have to come back out?
It would go to the general fund and come back out, but it would be, even though we kept the budget at 100,000, in essence, we would be using the budget we didn't spend this year to offset that, so that it doesn't affect the taxes. I mean, that.
No, it's not even a matter of the taxes and such. I'm just concerned the fact that we keep that line. I just think sometimes the legal line is a very important line, and I'd like to see it stay at 100,000.
Well,
one way or another.
It has it's a potential wild card. I'm not disagreeing with you, but, you know, we could budget for 100 and then go to 300, you know.
If by the time we get to the legal expenses section again, we might know how much of a carry forward there might be, that might help. That way we don't have to raise taxes for it. Any other thoughts on the council? Councilor Pelletier? Pelletier?
Yeah, I'm barely hearing you there. I'm not uncomfortable with the legal line being put where it is. The two cases that Council Madore was referring to, I believe, is being handled by the insurance company. And, you know, it's one of those things that things have been running rather smoothly, and really don't see any contentious issues, you know, coming up. So I'm comfortable leaving it where it is.
Thanks, Councilor Pelletier. Is everyone good at least waiting to see what the carry forward might be before making the final determination? Not that we're making that right now. All right.
Too many budgets, it's too low.
Moving on to page 5. Any major question or suggestion? Councilor Gray?
Yeah, just in reference to anybody in the public that's listening in that do not have a copy of the budget, in reference to page, could you say what the subject matter is?
Thank you, Councilor Gray. Page 5 is administration. And it is online as well, Councilor Gray, by the way. That's being shared with everyone online.
No, that's revenue right now.
Well, something's being shared online.
You didn't have it downloaded. This was not my fault.
Yeah, you're not gonna go to bat for me?
No, I am not. Sorry.
No, I can get it.
Yeah, just so I was trying to make it.
Sharing all your emails with the public.
It's all public information. Nothing to hide. Ah, it was hidden. Yeah, then it should show up.
Dragging into that folder.
So we'll go to page 6. Thank you, everyone, for your patience on this.
Yep.
All right. Page 6, planning code development. Any initial thoughts or suggestions from the council? All right. Moving on to page 7, which is Economic Development and Community Initiatives Director. Any thoughts or suggestions from the council? Councilor Madore, Mike.
All right. What are we gonna do about web streaming? I think it's one of those situations now where we've got YouTube, we've got multiple ways of getting meetings out. I'm not sure, and what if the proposal for technology for up here for our meetings and things to be able to make it better, I'm just wondering if the streaming service is necessary anymore. In the whole grand scheme of things, I mean, between Zoom, between the YouTube and everything else, how much more do we need to have this out there? And this is rather a small expense, but still, if it's not a necessity, why do we have it?
We are planning to eliminate the streaming service. As soon as the new equipment arrives and we have a successful test run of the YouTube and Facebook live streaming, we will be eliminating town hall streams from the budget. We savings of $2,400 annually, but no, that's $2,400.
No, it's an offset to the equipment that's going to be ordered, obviously, the expense too. I mean, as far as the.
Correct, and the YouTube and Facebook streaming platforms provide the same service, in more popularly used programs at no cost.
Thank you. Also, I realize that we are pass-through for CAT TV, but my understanding is, and I've gone over this with a few different people, we got CAT TV because we got a public access channel from Beeline in exchange for our whole rentals. And part of that was to have a public access channel and to be able to have a municipal service on there. And we do the service, Beeline, the CAT TV receives some money from Beeline. I'm just, at $5,000. I mean, I'm not seeing anything, I'm not seeing a channel anymore. I'm not seeing the service being used. I'm seeing the money coming in. But I think it's time to, when this, after this budget is done with, I think it's time to have a serious sit down with CAT TV and find out where they are and if they have any intention of coming back on the air. And if not, how can we then better utilize our public access channel, which is municipally owned, for the betterment of the community and communication, because there was a lot of people that used to get their council meetings, their school board meetings, and that off CAT TV, and they haven't been able to have it for the last few years. And so I just think that it's time to go ahead and have a serious dialogue with the CAT TV people and find out where we are and if we necessarily need to rethink that public access channel.
Do you have a response to that, or?
I do have a few ideas there that we could explore in the near future, but I'm happy to reach into that. It has been a whole priority of mine as I'm coming in and wrap my head around a whole lot of it. But I think in the coming month or two, I think it can be easily figured out.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Praise and Pelletier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had that written down earlier when I had gone through in reference to concerns in reference to Zooming and YouTube, the YouTube channel and Facebook channel. Can those be given over to the public service, which is required by federal law? And that we can broadcast the recordings that we do on Beeline?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bray. Councilor Pelletier.
Yes, I agree with Councilor Madore on the need to address CAT TV. A few points, though. The money is not paid to CAT TV by Beeline. The agreement that we approved through the order to give CAT TV money does not mention any provider that we have to give that money to. It's totally the council's choice, and we've been passing that money through with no oversight of getting any service for it. So, yeah, I totally agree. This has to be addressed. For a minor investment, they could be broadcasting live to that station versus giving them 5,000 to do something on a disc that, like I say, they haven't been doing it for a couple of years now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Pelletier. Councilor Danforth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we have representatives from Katahdin Area Television come speak to us? I know you've left 5,000 in there, originally it was 10,000. I'd like to know where they're at. I know they were getting some upgrades. The Beeline is doing some upgrades, so I think before we finalize anything, I think we need to know where they stand. In all fairness, that would be helpful for me.
Thank you, Councilor Danforth.
Yeah, I can look at that and have it find out. I wouldn't recommend that it happens next week, but got a full program planned for you next week. But I think in the upcoming 1 or 2 meetings following that, we could probably arrange for that to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Any other thoughts on page 7, Community Initiatives Director and Economic Development? All right, moving on to page 8, Police Department and their program. None? Councilor Danforth?
Excuse me, I noticed the DARE stipend had been zeroed out, and I know it's because they didn't have a program in the past. I did have a conversation recently with Chief McDonough, and he's looking to bring the program back. I'm not sure if he's had a chance to speak with the manager about that. So it was just a casual conversation, so to speak. So I'd like to just maybe you can reach out to him and see where he stands on that. One of the officers that we recently hired back, Officer Gaddison, was trained to do that. And I think they're looking to be able to offer that again. So just wanted to mention that.
Council Danforth, this is the first time we hear of that. I'm happy to have that discussion with him. There is national data on how that program is extremely unsuccessful. So I'm happy to have that conversation though.
And I'm aware of that data that you're speaking of too. We can have that conversation, or I would like to hear from them as well, because what it does, it puts an officer in the schools. It builds relationships between the school and the police department, and the data is mixed. So there's different reasons to have that, and maybe not just base a decision on that alone. So let's talk about that.
Thank you, Councilor Danforth. Any other? Councilor Bragdon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Exactly 1 year ago, we actually had this discussion. I am not in favor of the DARE program. I think there is a lot of flaws to the program. However, I am in favor of a program being at the school, whether it be for mental health or something that's related to the issues that the school is dealing with now. I think there's other workarounds for getting the police officers into the school, especially when talking about cyberbullying and bullying in general. I don't see a reason to have a stipend for the DARE program because of those reasons, but I definitely think there should be some kind of program going on at the school, whether it be mental health or other situations that are going on over there right now.
Thank you, Councilor Bragdon. Any other thoughts on the Councilor Madore?
Where I understand, I do, I hate it. I hated it when the legislature had it, I hate it, we got it. Where I understand there is significant data that says that the DARE program basically doesn't work. I do think that having some kind of program in consolidation with the school to create a bridge between the police department and familiarity with the officers and the kids, I think is a necessary situation, especially in small communities like ours. I think, and more so now, it used to be Millinocket had a police force that everybody knew who the officers were. Now that we are contracted service out, I think sometimes, with the exception of a few officers that have come back, there is not a lot of interaction with the officers that are now serving the community, and especially when it comes to the children. So I really think that for no other reason than having that interaction and that bonding of familiarity to, I mean, if a situation arose and a child needs to know that gentleman in that blue uniform, they've seen him before, they might be a little bit more accepting of aid and assistance from an officer than they would necessarily from a stranger. It's just because. And so I think in that sense, something like DARE does create a connection. It may not, the program itself may not be effectual to stop drugs within a community, but I think it does offer an interpersonal connection between children and the police force. And that's just my thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Dorr. And for what the manager said, we'll hear back from that on that program specifically. And any councilor is more than welcome to make a recommendation on what other programs might be good. Councilor Craig?
Talking in reference to having a program, any program in the school system, why is this not part of a school budget versus a municipal budget? Obviously, police officers are, when we have a police department, municipal employees, but they serve the school as well as the town. And in that capacity, I think any calculation of work by the police department or any position that deals with the subject matter, not necessarily the DARE program, should not probably be funded in some capacity under a school budget, which then would be reflected possibly from state reimbursement or state aid of the cost of education, which would be a greater share or a partial share from the state, and not all necessarily from the municipality.
Thank you, Councilor Craig. Councilor Bragdon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to disagree with you, Councilor Dorr. I learned the officers' names through high school by them volunteering and coming into the school in the classrooms on their own time. Or when they were working, they would stop by and say hello, not from the DARE program. That being said, I think that's a department question. I'm asking them why aren't they showing up at the schools more often, introducing themselves to students. They used to do it before. I don't see a reason why they can't do it now, and it doesn't cost any money versus DARE, which costs money. I do want to point out the National Guard used to come to the school as well, so maybe this is something else we can reach out to see if maybe they could do a course at school on cyberbullying, cyber harassment, or even cybersecurity was one they had done when we were in high school. There are plenty of resources out there. It's just finding the right ones. But I don't see a reason spending money when we can avoid that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bragdon. Any other council thoughts on page 8? Seeing none, moving to page 9, Fire Ambulance General. Mr. Manager?
I'd just point out that though it's not included in this draft of the budget, Chief Malcolm had brought forward a request that we look at the potential of 1 to 3 additional employees in that department. We haven't built it into this budget draft, but we wanted to bring that up with the council as well.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. And on that note, I actually see a line anyway here for Assistant Chief Stipend. I know that when we had our previous chief, who was chief of fire and police, Chief Malcolm was essentially assistant chief to the fire department. I think we should talk about potentially creating that position or having this stipend line raised so that we have also just another assistant chief. That's a very standard practice basically across fire departments. If there's any thoughts from the council, Councilor Madore?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that line is not the
Assistant fire chief. That is the, that line is not the,
the line is not a fire, assistant fire chief. That is a second assistant, and that is a union position, I believe, or stipend for that union position. We had at one time we had a chief and an assistant chief. My question more for the town manager is
who, that's the same guy.
who are we going to add to it? We talked about just EMTs, are we talking EMT firefighters? Who, I have a kiss of death of this thing.
It might be trying to tell you
for
something.
EMTs, are we just looking for EMT firefighters? No, you want to increase the department by 3 people. Given the amount of recruiting problems, do you think that you're going to be able to fill those positions that you're requesting moving forward, building in the budget? Hasn't been a lot of, not exactly people jumping to fill what we do have positions open, or at least haven't over the last year. Adding 3 more, does that make it easier to go ahead and what makes you think that those positions will be filled now as compared to what we've had in the past? We've had openings that we've had a hard time filling.
So, I will say in there that I do see it being a challenge to fill those positions, if any. I do believe that the idea would be to seek a cross-trained, EMS fire skill set in a prison. I'd ask Tom at this point, if you want to talk about it a little bit further. At the moment, I'm willing to ask Tom to come up and speak to that a little bit more.
yes, I would.
Tom Melvin, Fire Chief. My initial proposal to manager and treasurer were that we either had 1 position, which I've got 1 open right now, I'm trying to fill, or that we had 3. I'm telling you right now, you're understaffed. We are great man staff. Can I fill them? I don't know. I don't know. I understand. I think we need the opportunity for the ability to do that, to provide that service for our community. 1 person alone doesn't work. I was never an advocate for that. We made it work for rough times. We didn't have much choice. But the way things are today, the long nights I don't need sleep because I'm just constant. Make sure we're all right. They have to be cross-trained like we're a union job. And I don't have any control of that whatsoever. I mean, there's all kinds of different ideas we could do, but we're a union shop. Well, we're a union shop, then we have to go by the rules. We have to be by our UTs. As I told manager, this is just a big concern of mine, and I really need to address it.
Thoughts from the council or questions?
Yeah,
Councilor?
now, again, I don't discount the fact that we probably do, and I know we do, we're understaffed, we need people in the position in the fire department. What's going to be, Tom, is going to be a difference or an enticement or whatever to get those positions filled within this department. I mean, if you told me tomorrow we needed 3 new firefighters, I'd probably say, sure, go ahead. But having a position open and having candidates to fill it or are willing to go ahead and work, sometimes it's entirely different things, especially in small communities like ours trying to recruit. I kind of don't, I have a hard time increasing the budget line with the expectation of perhaps having somebody there or being able to recruit. I'd rather try to do this as a you know, one person at a time type thing until we can get these things built amicably. I just don't see us filling 3 positions when we have a hard time filling 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Dora. You're welcome to speak to that.
He makes a very good point. I can't stand here and tell you that I can go. I'm working with the main fire chiefs. I'm working with Southern Maine Community College right now. We're trying to find out from students what they're looking for when they want. Looking for a job. What's drawing them? And as I'm hearing from the Southern Maine chiefs, they're all being drawn south of us, some of the states. There's a lot of reasons. You know, we've got departments that are losing people to completely independent pilots because of money incentives. I hear your concern, it's my concern as well, but I think that we really need to step down that path.
Thank you, Chief. Councilor Pelletier, then Brian.
Yeah, regardless of the manning level that is decided upon for the fire department, I believe it's only good management to have an assistant fire chief, whether it is one of the hourly employees or a deputy chief position that is exempt, simply because, you know, that position is key and you should be planning for succession. You know, be a lot easier to replace a firefighter than it would be a chief. So if we have somebody in-house that's already filling in when the chief is off somewhere on his vacation, or heaven forbid, if he has a medical issue and he's missing for a month, then we'd be, you know, covered. So I think it only makes sense to do something now about having an assistant or a deputy chief. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Pelletier. Councilor Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, it's similar to law enforcement and of course, this field as well. It's difficult to find the individuals in the current market that we're in, but whether we can find them or not, the need is there. And I think we need to appropriate the funds to fill those potential slots and hope that we can attract the people. If we can attract 1, 2, or 3, becomes immaterial until we actually make the money available and make the offer out there to try to attract people. If we don't allocate funds for it, we're not going to get them. If we have any hope of attracting people that might like this type of community, might want to return home or something like that and do this, I do think it's a larger issue that similar to law enforcement, particularly this field, that probably the state should be addressing in educational programs and trying to attract kids out of school, high school, and other field into this specialty, and have a training and skill level being presented. So we'd have a surplus of individuals. I don't think we'll see a surplus, but have a number of individuals that might decide to choose this career field going forward, larger than just us. But if we don't put some money in there for this, we're never going to attract a single person to fill these slots. This is basically the echo from the boomers. You look at the generational time periods, those that were born in the late 40s and early 50s, you go 30 years forward, we're 30 years forward, so we're 60 years forward from that. So it's a number of individuals coming up to retirement age, and across the state, they're losing a lot of these people with these skills. If we don't attract younger people into this field, we're really going to be hurting.
Thank you, Councilor Craig. Councilor Bragdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Answering your question and balancing out Louis, I am in agreement that there should be an assistant fire chief for the exact reasons that Louis mentioned. God forbid something happen and we don't have someone in that position that knows what they're doing. As Louis said, it'd be harder to find a chief than it would be to find a firefighter. For all those reasons, I think it should be a budgeted line item for new assistant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bragdon. Mr. Manager.
I'm happy to explore both options. If that's the desire of the council, and I can come back with suggestions when we do the departmental breakdowns.
I'm assuming, to Councilor Cray's point, the one open position is budgeted already.
One open position is budgeted already.
How long is
That's
that?
replacing a recent vacated position.
Thank you. Do I have a second to Councilor Cray's suggestion of the 3 positions being budgeted? Councilor Cray, is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I thought at this point, we're not moving on this matter, we're discussing and having it presented to us and the public. But what's coming forward to us when we're going to actually go through the budget, I think we need those types of numbers. And I don't necessarily know if there's a difference between an assistant chief or a lieutenant or somebody else in that. I'll yield to the chief as to how some other communities address this type of issue. I'm sure a lot of them have gone through it already. We're not the first town that has shrunk and seen the decline in population and the necessity to reevaluate budgets. But I'm sure there's a lot of examples out there how other people have addressed this.
Well, Councilor Cray, as I said, probably before you came in, I was saying that just as had been done in the past during budget sessions, councilor can make a recommendation to an adjustment or adding something, and then it just needs a second, and then we would have it up for a vote eventually, but at least have the numbers for the future departmental readings.
I'll just say I apologize for being late. I held up in Bangor for things that got me here late to the point. And I guess if that's which I didn't hear your introduction of that. I thought we were presenting things for the manager to come back and give us the hardcore figures. So rather, I suspect that it doesn't need a motion because we're all asking a variety of things from drug enforcement to whatnot. And I see the trader nodding that they can do this. Thank you.
Yeah, what I would suggest is we put together a chart of different options. So would it be an assistant chief plus 2 extra EMTs? I mean, what's the combination you would like to look at? And we can lay that out as the cost of these different options, and then you can decide from there.
Sound good, everyone? Councilor Danforth?
Did yours die too, or?
So I appreciate, Mary Alice, what you just said, because I'm sitting here thinking about all these different options. I don't feel like I have enough information to make a decision. I'm fully on board with the assistant chief, deputy chief, whatever that looks like, and that sort of thing. And we need to take care of our community. We have an older community. We have an aging workforce. I'm curious on, I don't want to say what is our deficit, what is our need, and what don't we have here based on the workforce and other like communities? Where should we be for optimal service to our community? So I need some more information before I say yes, put 3 positions in there and what those positions are look like. So I'd like to be suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Danforth. Manager.
I would agree with the solution that Mary Alice presented. I think that her and I and Chief Malcolm can get together and discuss those options and put a chart of comparison to each of them that we can bring forward for the next workshop.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Any other thoughts on the page 9?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Dorr?
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with making suggestions or adjustments for personnel without numbers to back up what that decision may be. So I'm looking forward to seeing real numbers as far as the proposal is concerned. I'm not going to be in a situation where I want to go ahead and propose or suggest an increase in a line just arbitrarily. I need the numbers to know what I'm going to be addressing, whether or not I want to go ahead to it or not. So until such time as that those numbers come through, I'm not prepared to do anything.
Thank you, Councilman Dor. As I stated earlier in the meeting, we're not making any determinations like that. It's whether we'll have those numbers for the next meeting or not. I'm fine with any suggestion coming out of any counselor just being brought up at the next meeting. I figured it would make sense to just do what we've been doing for the past 5 years that I've been here, which is if there's a recommendation from a counselor, then it would get a second, and then that would be provided to us at a future budget session. But if the council would rather go in the way of having any and every individual council thought be brought up to the manager to be proposed at the next meeting, we can do that as well. Councilor Medora.
Yes, sir.
I'm not opposed to suggesting increasing of a line, but when it comes to creating a position, I want to know, I want, before anything is proposed, I want to know the breakdown of what it's going to cost. I think that's, you putting the cart before the horse. I'd rather ask the manager or the chief or Mary Alice, whoever, to come up with some hard numbers to take a look at before deciding whether or not I'm willing to go ahead and entertain a proposal to increase the line.
That's exactly what we're doing right now, Councilor Medora, just as Councilor Prey earlier suggested that we look at options for how we pay for revaluation. We're not determining any number right now. We're requesting information from the manager for a future meeting. Again, I'm doing it in the same way that's been done since I've been on the council 5 years. And it's that a councilor makes a suggestion and a second councilor can support that suggestion. That way, not every single thought and idea that comes up out of this meeting is another assignment and another task for the manager and the treasurer to come back to us. That's the purpose of this, is to get that information. Thank you. Any other councilor comments or questions? Thank you, Chief Mountain. Moving on to page 10, Fire Department. Any initial thoughts from the council?
Again, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Medora.
Yeah, again, if we're entertaining, see, everything pulls off everything. If we're talking about going ahead and increasing personnel, are we then talking about increasing the cost of training? Are we then going ahead and, you know, everything is proportional. So until such time as we get those numbers on personnel itself, we really can't go down through and hit any of these other lines because we can't figure out what we need to do to support those people.
If there's another line on here that you feel needs more funding, when we get that information at the next meeting, then we'll have all the numbers that we can compare and contrast it. This is an overview so that if there's anything that stands out to any counselor, we can discuss that, have a second. That way the manager is not running around at every suggestion that comes out of this. And then we'll compare it all the next time we review these departments. Mr. Manager?
Yes, I would just say that I think it would be a natural cause and effect that when we are looking at these options and creating this chart that we can present to you, the natural effect of the position will cause change in these other budget lines. So I would anticipate that would be a full package type of presentation, including both page 9 and 10.
Did you want to suggest training increases or anything, Councilman Medora?
Until I know how many people we're gonna have to know.
Any other council thoughts or comments on page 10?
Give us a second.
I suggest we increase the funding for batteries.
Well, Councilor McEwen has pretty good batteries here, so. All right, moving on to page 11, ambulance. Any additional thoughts or suggestions from the council? Thank you. All right, seeing none. Moving on to page 12. Community services, insurances, and enforcement officials. Any suggestions or questions from the council?
Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Madore?
Yeah, on the streetlights, and I'm gonna bring this up at the council meeting anyway, but, since we changed over to the LED lighting, especially along Main Street, is it my imagination or is this side of Main Street darker? Then it doesn't seem like the illumination is equal on the street as far as Main Street is concerned. It seems like there's less illumination down here as compared to the higher part of Mount Avenue. And I don't know if that's something that we pay a good amount for our streetlights and that. So I'm just wondering if that could be something that could be looked into. I've noticed it in the last probably month or so, that the illumination is definitely varied quite a bit.
I'm speechless. I'm sorry. You have to forgive me. I have not experienced that or heard that or noticed it myself, but I'm happy to see if there's any information that Ron can provide or if there's anything we can do to look at an answer to that.
If you would, because not only have I noticed it, but several, not only have I noticed it, but it's been brought to my attention by several citizens that Main Street lights that are out on this end. Yeah. I'm working on getting them. Okay. Turn that on. We don't know if this. No, it's not my imagination. There is definitely, yeah, all right. Or anybody else's. I'm working on it. All right, thank you. It's two separate circuits. Halfway down Main Street.
Any other thoughts on page 12 from the council? Seeing none, moving on to page 13, non-constable and fringe benefits. Any major thoughts or suggestions, recommendations? And seeing none, moving on to page 14, administration and garage maintenance. Seeing none, moving on to page 15. Public Works, Roads and Construction. Mr. Manager, I know you mentioned, as we all know, we've talked about it multiple times on the council level, but do you know specifically, or Ralph, maybe you can speak to the specific areas that you're targeting for this?
I do have a list in my office. However, we may be able to have Ralph speak to that. We may know better off the top of his head.
Susie, Public Works Director. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna split that project up into sidewalks and roads. So we have 250,000 allocated for roads and 100,000 for sidewalks. And I do have a list. I gave it to the manager, so I don't know if we'll get a copy of that. That's gonna give you guys a couple of options, what you want to pay for what you want to do for sidewalks. So we'll talk about that once we do workshops.
Thank you very much. Any thoughts from the council on that or questions? We'll just look forward to your email, Councilor Madore.
Yeah, not on the paving and such. I'm looking at the gas and oil line, and I'm concerned that the increase of $10,000, is that going to be sufficient, Ralph? I know you had to kind of back off a little bit to make sure last year's budget fit in because of the increase in fuel. I'm just concerned that $10,000 may not be enough going forward if the price remains the way it is or increases.
Yeah, it's hard to judge where the price is gonna be, but that's based on 450 a gallon diesel.
Okay.
So, not too worried about E10 gasoline, because we get a pretty good discount on it. And they've got, enough for 6 months supply on it, so it's not too much to worry about. But, the price of diesel, I plug that in, so it's 450 a gallon, we should be fine. Right now, we're at 453, so we don't know where it's gonna go, if it's gonna go back up or not.
And just to clarify, that's after your reimbursements.
Right.
If you're comfortable with that number, what I don't want to do, and I've mentioned this before in previous budgets, is I don't want to go ahead and see maintenance line and fuel lines come in low, and then have to go ahead and take out from fund balance to cover differences when prices fluctuate. And certainly, the price of gas and oil right now is in a state of flux all over across the board. And it's not just public works. I'm talking about every department, making sure that they're adequately budgeting for fuel going forward as best they can for this coming year, because we don't know where this is going to go, if it's going to go up, or it's going to go down.
You can look at the 3-year average too. I think 10,000 be all right.
Okay. Thank you, Councilman.
We do get the taxes back on it too, so that goes back into our revenue. So.
Thank you, Ralph.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on page 15 from the council? Seeing none. Moving to page 16, transfer site. Any thoughts from the council? I am curious in the increase for the landfill costs. Is this anticipating that this is going to go back down to the Hampton facility that's been out for a while, or?
It's the same price, and then we'll be all, we're locked in with the MRC. The price increase is actually the CIP index, was 6.8%. So the tipping fees did go up by $5 a ton. And we do get a $5 a ton rebate, being members of the MRC. So.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the council on this?
And we don't know where the CIP index is going to be the first of the year either. So I would imagine the inflation is going to be hard.
Thank you, Ralph. Seeing no other council thoughts on that, moving on to page 17, library and debt and interest. Any council thought or comment on that? Councilman Madore?
Yeah,
On the library, is the thought of the council that eventually we're going to go ahead and go back to the days where we were paying $175,000 for the library? I mean, this has increased every year, and it is increased exponentially. Is there a number or a figure or something where we're looking to fund the library? I mean, we went from 170 down to 20, then up to 40, then it's gone up to 70, and now we're looking at putting another, it's gone to 75 basically, and now we're looking at going ahead and doing another 25. I mean, is there a cap? Are we looking at a cap for funding the library?
Councilman Madore, I'd probably have Diana, the director of the library, to speak to her goals and vision for requests from the town. And probably then we'll have more of a discussion, especially with the counselor not here as well to speak to it.
She is on. I don't know if she wants to.
Mr. Manager?
Just want to add that Diana and I have had recent discussions and implemented a new agreement where she and the library will be submitting as if they were a department of the town during the manager's report once a month. And, you know, updates and goings on at the library, as well as a quarterly financial overview presentation. She come every few months to give an update on how things go financially. She did provide me with some charts that go along with previous conversations that took place before my time, but mapped out the agreement that was spoken about with the increases throughout over however many years. I can include that in my next council packet. And that, you know, it does weigh out the differences with how they are handling the investments of their donations, as well as their funding from the Seed Foundation, how that is projected to balance out. But I would suggest that you hang tight on that thought until Thursday of next week, when we have more information in our council packet on that.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Frank?
Mr. Chairman, following up on Councilman Madura's comments, I would think this would be an appropriate place for us to consider the use of ARPA funds instead of putting it in the budget. I think that we can use those funds without putting an extra burden on the taxpayers by using the money that we're getting from the federal government.
Thank you, Councilor Frey. And just a reminder to everyone, it was this time last year roughly that we said we would do that very thing, donate a good amount of money from ARPA funds to the library, and a year later, we still have not done that. Just something to remind the council on. But if you say there's numbers and figures coming Thursday on this specifically, I know the library also took on a lot of the utility costs and other things that the town was paying before in a previous agreement. So you'll speak to those things on Thursday.
That's correct.
Any other thoughts from the Councilor Danforth?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Give it 1 second. Matt, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to respond to Councilor Prey and his comment about using ARPA funds to fund the library. That was a conversation we had, but I think it was specific to Mobilize Katahdin and the Resource Navigator and that particular program, which is a program serving and meeting the needs of some of our most vulnerable and connecting them to resources. I believe this funding that the library that we're earmarking this money for is just the infrastructure for the library, because it's such an asset to cover some of the costs on the library programs in general, where the ARPA funds would be directed more to helping people meet their basic needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Danforth. Any other thoughts from the council on page 17? Councilor Pelletier?
Yeah, I agree with Councilor Danforth regarding the library and the 25,000 being added to the line as a yearly amount. Their expenses, like every department in this town, are raising, and being on the Friends of the Millnock Library, fundraising isn't going as well as it has been. So, you know, either we want to support the library or we don't, and I'm all in favor of keeping that 25,000 there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Pelletier. Any other thoughts from the council on page 17? And seeing none, move to page 18, general assistance and public health welfare. Councilor Bragg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see that there was some money removed from the rent section 3701. Can you elaborate as to why? Was it just not enough, not people not pulling money out for rent or for general assistance or?
Well, it is government funding that is allocated to us. I am not the expert in the rule on that.
Well, I mean, if you just look at the history, if you look at where we're at year to date. Past 2 years, 5,000, 6,000 is what we spent. This year to date, 4,400. So an $18,000 budget based on the history and where we're at right now appeared excessive. And even 12,000 looks pretty generous if this trend continues.
Or is there anything you want to add to that? Anything new information?
And there has been a lot of other programs out there covering rent through the past couple of years, and I'm assuming that had an effect on this as well. Thank you. Any other comments from the council on this? Seeing none, moving to page 19, cemetery. Any thoughts from the council?
It always comes up, and I don't know if if we're covering it. I know the memorial flags, Memorial Day flags or something else, but in the past, we have been approached to continually update and fly flags for the cemetery. Is that the memorial flags?
That's further on in the budget.
That's further on the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Dore. Any other council comment on cemetery? And seeing none, moving to page 20, recreation and snow sled and ATV programs. Any thoughts from the council? And seeing none, moving on to page 21, airport operations and airport business. Any thoughts from the council? Yeah, Jeff, please.
Looking at this, the last time I looked at an update, the current round of bills had been submitted within Trio. And obviously, the gas, oil, and grease line, and the heating fuel line is going to need to be adjusted. So I'm going to be speaking with the manager and the treasurer on that. We need to talk about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. One thing I'm going to be bringing up regarding our overall budget is kind of this space that we're in as a town, I feel, in the sense that there are a lot of areas where we can find future revenues by making small investments. I know that there are at least 6 people willing to and wanting to build hangars at the airport, something that would bring revenue not only from the leasing rates, but also taxable structures. I will at some point be suggesting that we look at, and it may not be in a budget line, it may be in a future council order or something, but looking at the cost of just preparing those sites for those who want to build hangars and who have the ability to build hangars in the very near future. I think it's low-hanging fruit, a way for us to get more revenue, ideally for a small initial upfront cost. Just want to put that out there. Councilman Dore.
While I agree with you that hangars is a good revenue source for the airport, it's my understanding that we have to go ahead and I agree with site preparation, but also there has to be an expansion and extension of the taxiway along with it to get to those hangar areas, I believe. That is unless that's a part of it, the FAA improvement is going to be moved down the road. We can't necessarily move on that until they decide that it's that time to do it. Or whether that's included with the runway renovations or resurfacing, I don't know, but that strikes me that where it's got to be done first, and that's, I don't know where that falls in the FAA plan for the airport when those funds will be available to do that taxiway.
Want to speak to that, Jeff?
Our 2023 runway rehabilitation and expansion includes a 500-foot extension on that taxiway. So next year. Yep. So the master plan is due to come out. I've seen the rough draft, and that includes a complete taxi lane, the entire length of 3-4, and a complete taxi lane independent of the runway on 29, plus an extension of the runway. That's what they're recommending.
But that's not all going to happen in, sorry. That's not all going to happen in 23.
If 23 happens, if the project is approved for 23, then the extension may happen on the runway and the taxi lane extension for the hangars.
Councilor Craig?
Jeff, if I may, Mr. Chairman, Jeff, is there some of this money coming from the federal infrastructure program? Have those funding been increased specifically, or do you know?
I don't know what's been increased specifically in the infrastructure side. I'm working off the FAA CIP, same program we used for years.
This is based on a program that passed the previous year.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, the CIP will be having meetings again. I'm guessing June for 5 years out. On normal CIP, normal FAA funding. The infrastructure funding, Build Back Better or whatever, that hasn't been addressed yet.
The second question is something we discussed at the previous council meeting. How much acreage do we have that we might be able to lease out or rent out adjacent to the airport that wouldn't interfere with FAA for gardens or?
The best answer I have to that is we haven't identified all of it yet. We've identified some of it, not all.
Would you dare to venture what you've already evaluated? How many acres?
There's
That's
probably.
at the next meeting.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Come
it's
back with
probably-
some figures.
I don't
Thank
know,
you.
5, 7.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Craig. Any other council comment on page 21? Seeing none. Moving on to page 22. Holiday observation and events, capital improvements, special capital improvements, and county tax. I think I know Councilor Craig's thoughts on county tax.
Too much.
Any thoughts from the council, page 22?
Restate, I think what had been said earlier, we do not have anything in here for the airport special project for the FAA grant funded project. We're waiting for more specific information because we also don't know what, it'll be important to know what the town match would be or contribution to any projects that they're offering to fund.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. Seeing no other comment on page 22, Councilor Madore?
Yeah. Yep. Line 9505 downtown revitalization. I think we need to go ahead and do a real serious considering either doing start building that account up. We may not be able to get the grant funds and things that or we may need to have money for matches for projects in the downtown area. I think that part of that, and there's a beautification part to the downtown. So I think we need to put some money back into that line. I would propose as seed money to go ahead and propose to put $25,000 into that account, that line to move forward for downtown revitalization projects, for possible use for matches or grants to do that work.
Any thoughts from the council on that? Councilor Brand?
Mr. Chairman, I support the idea, the concept. I'm not ready to commit to a dollar figure.
Jumping off one.
Well, I would second at least having that number available to us for the next meeting so we can see how it fits in with the overall budget. Any other thoughts? And seeing none?
Yeah.
Oh, Councilman. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to be patient. No, I agree with Councilor Madore as far as putting something in there. A lot of times you have to go after grants, you do have to have some sort of matching dollars or show that the town, is invested, even if it's just a little bit. And so to have that money available is a good idea.
Thank you, Councilor Danforth. Any other council thoughts on that? And seeing none, I'll move to revenue. Any thoughts on page 1, general government elections and registrations and town clerk's department? Give Matt a minute there, sorry about that.
Well, maybe it won't open.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilor Brand?
why are you bringing that up in reference to revenues? I don't recall what the fines are for people who have animals that they walk around town and don't pick up after. I'd suggest we might want to double the fines and have an enforcement person who probably bring in a lot of revenues.
Thank you, Councilor Brand. Any other thoughts from the council on page 1 of the revenue, municipal revenue? And seeing none, moving to page 2. Assessing municipal building, planning code, and economic development. Noting that the $69,000 at the bottom there is from the first payments from Arcatada that was mentioned earlier in the meeting.
Did you say doubting or noting?
Noting,
Noting, yes.
was not doubting.
Right, nope, that is correct.
Seeing no other thoughts from the council. Page 3, police department, fire department, ambulance. Councilor Madore?
Yeah, going back to the proposal to increase the staff for the fire department. With that, then would we be able to make more runs as far as the ambulance is concerned, especially transfers and the like? Because I know that's revenue, those are revenue builders.
Chief Malcolm, you're more than welcome to speak to that.
Chief Malcolm, I want to say yes.
You want it?
But in all honesty, I don't know. My major concern right now is protecting the community and making sure that I have the staff. But when I call them, we respond. Transfers that we can do out of this hospital, I'm all for. Transfers all over the state of Maine. Not interested. Not making any money.
No, it's okay.
But my hope is, yes, we would be getting more transfers out of the line than we're losing now. I'm not going to leave no line. That's my strategy. That's what council can tell me to change that. That's what I've always wanted. We'll continue with some over. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And the restrictions for even getting reimbursed from transfers have increased tremendously over the past few years. Just to get reimbursed from insurance, it's nothing like it's been, and even just the past couple of years. So it's difficult finding money for being reimbursed for that. Any other thoughts from the council? Chief Malcolm?
Sorry, I don't know if I can do this or not. The other thing that I've talked to the manager about, during the last year of our contracts, Scott after Scott, and in my opinion, was way underpaid. So we're gonna be looking at new contracts and pay what we should be getting paid. The county can't tell me that I get money with what I see going up to buildings up there and inspections. It's just, I just want to say that maybe some revenue in that area too.
Thank you, Chief.
That's a very good point, and I really fully support that renegotiation of that contract.
And I know with the land, I don't know where the land use or changes that have happened with the county, if that's fully gone through yet, but I know that a portion of that required, any new development required the local fire department to sign off on and accept those developments, getting the affirmative from Chief Malcolm. With these new developments that are either proposed or have already been built, Chief Malcolm, have you been reached out to, or do you know what the timeline is for hearing back on that?
The only project that we have been reached out to so far was the one in New York. But he's living up there. He didn't talk to us about, we didn't talk anything about monies or anything yet, but he did talk to us. And when that passes, I believe it's going to pass. There is a portion there that which is some guidance on those developments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Any other thoughts from the council? I am curious about the police department. I know we contract with them. Is it typical, and probably Councilor Prey, you'd know this better than me, is it typical when a town contracts with someone else, like the sheriff's office, that any tickets that are written by the sheriff's office or another contracted service goes into the sheriff's budget or revenue, or can that be sent to the town if it's done in the town limits?
It's been 32 years since I've been in the legislature.
This is Mike.
It only takes a moment. It's been 32 years since I was in the legislature. Did you say I was dead? No. So I don't know the answer. That it used to be that it went to the court system, and there's a formula that somehow that used to get shared. But what's happened in the last 30 years, I couldn't answer that question. But previously, we did ask, or I reached out to Sheriff Ross when he was the sheriff, and tried to get him. Reached out to Sheriff Ross when he was the and try to get a comparison of what the cost would be to the sheriff. They expressed no interest, but basically said there'd be no savings to us either. And of course, we'd be kind of what they're facing at the state level right now, with the state police pulling out and covering rural areas. I think they put in their budget, and their Sheriff Morton is requesting 3 additional officers to cover 3 state troopers that used to take a rotational shift covering rural areas. Of course, Sheriff's Office is supposed to be regional police coverage, and we've kind of gone into that with multiple communities contracting East Market. We've created a regional police force, or I guess you could say East Market has done it. With that coverage, but to your specific question, I suggested contact the chief of, McDonald's, thank you, to find out if municipalities are going to get a share of the current situation. The previous administration, in the governorship, took a lot of funds away from municipalities and various units. I know when I was at the County Commissioners Association, we were discussing some of the loss of revenues that used to go to counties that the state took when they faced an economic downturn that really haven't all been returned yet. This next year will be the first year we'll be back to the full 100% of revenue sharing, those types of things that we're seeing a surplus of revenues coming in because we made that adjustment. But I can talk to those very specifics that you're asking.
Thank you, Councilor Frey. I raised that question partially because of our conversations on the council level of going towards enforcement more with things like parking in areas that people shouldn't be and destroying town property, by doing that. If the police department eventually takes some of these issues and fines people, I'm curious to know if those fines will make it back to the town. Councilor Dorr?
Yeah, if it's enforcing an ordinance within the town of Millinocket, the revenue comes back to the town of Millinocket for any fines that gets levied. We have had times where, unfortunately, we have lost, before Mary Alice came, we lost in the county, we had judgments against, say, property owners for property maintenance or whatever, court assigned a payment plan, whatever, but an account was never set up to keep track of the payment plan, so there was no way of tracking whether or not the payments were ever made. But that, again, that was pre-Mary Alice, so, but yeah, anytime that we get a, supposedly, we're supposed to, anytime we get a judgment from the court on a municipal fine or ordinance violation, it's supposed to come back to the town of Millinocket, plus court costs. Yeah.
To my knowledge,
Mary Alice, you want to speak to that?
Well, all you gotta do is look at the activity, and there's been like a couple payments that have come to the town, and I believe those are from the state. So, just looking at the activity, no, that's not happening.
That might be something to follow up on.
yeah, we're happy.
Thank you. Seeing no other thoughts of the council on page 3. Moving on to page 4. Insurances, fringe benefits, public works administration, public works, roads and construction, and transfer site. Thoughts from the council? Councilor Dorr?
Yeah, just county agreements. Hard to believe that within the course of span of probably a decade, when we started out, when the Scottish County providing services for them, fire, ambulance, or something like that, we got $1. So the fact that we are where we are now, we're over, I think we're over 10 now. I know Penobscot, we're definitely over 10,000 that we receive for reimbursement for contracted services for fire and ambulance. And now the solid waste management contracts that has been negotiated with the counties. We're actually we're in much better financial shape now for revenue generation than we ever were. But yeah, there is room for improvement, and I'd like to see the contracts renegotiated and see if we can get a little better or fair share, because the county seems to have, especially Scottish County, seems to have an influx of money, and I don't see why they can't come up a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Dorr. Any other thoughts from the council? And seeing none, moving to page 5. General assistance, public health, welfare, cemetery, recreation, and snow sledding ATV program. Any thoughts from the council? And seeing none. Moving on to page 6. airport operations, airport business, holiday observation and events, capital improvements, special capital improvements. Any thoughts from the council? And seeing none. And the last sheet here is the 5-year capital plan. Give Matt a minute to pull that up. And thank you, Councilor Bragdon, for continuing to serve in your unpaid role in tech wizardry.
It's okay, I enjoy it.
Any thoughts from the council on the 5-year capital plan?
I had a thought.
Mr. Manager?
We'll see on that capital plan that there are intended purchases of power cots for FY23 and FY24 under fire and ambulance. Both cost $30,000. Chief Malcolm had brought forward an alternative plan to that we will consider very soon. The company that provides those has offered a lease to own program on that equipment. And we could potentially get both cots sooner rather than later, looking at FY23. And the options there are to be leased at 2 annual payments of $31,000 or 5 annual payments of $12,000 a piece. So there are a couple of options to look at getting both pieces of those equipment in a less impactful way in the upfront of our budget.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Councilor Madore?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. What is the life expectancy of the equipment once, I mean, if we're looking at something, say we decide to go ahead and draw it out to 5 years for lease payment, what's the life expectancy on the equipment? How many years? Is it 10 years, 5 years?
They're saying the life expectancy of the power cost is 10 years. We try to get 15 hours because of usage. These new cars that we're talking about, the other good thing about them is that the newest that they have just come out. They're lighter, they're more compact, they have a lot more features on them, and the big thing is they're usable for households. Bought one. My next ambulance purchase, capital includes a power unit in the trunk when we buy it, so that the car will be be able to use that car. And the other thing, the presentation I gave to the manager, that also includes 5-year maintenance, which we pay out every year anyway, keep a maintenance plan on our cars. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Any other thoughts from the council on the 5-year capital plan? All right, seeing none. That was a full reading there. Obviously, we'll have all the information that was requested at future workshops. Just so the public is aware, following this upcoming Thursday, we are going to be doing an every week workshop every Thursday. On off-council meeting days, it'll start at 5, just like this one. On council meeting days, it'll start at 4. Those future budget workshops will go over specific departments. Each time, those department heads will be present to speak to any questions or comments from the council. This will eventually conclude with a two-series public hearing, which is where the council will formally have a public hearing, which calls for public comment and is the official passing of the budget through those hearings. An agenda will be sent out in the near future on which departments will be featured in each one of the weeks. Unless there's any thoughts or comments from the council before we adjourn the workshop. Seeing no thoughts, we are adjourned.